let me say the three fundamentals of being a persuasive communicator.
An MIT grad, product manager at Meta, and group product manager at Google. Today's guest is going to showcase which skill in the AI space is going to help you stand out while you get into the big tech, which skill will help you perform much better as compared to your other peers. So, without wasting your time, let's get into it. If you're new to my channel, then click on the subscribe button. Welcome, Roshan. Today, I've been following you on LinkedIn from quite a while now. I've seen you started Amplify PM as well, so I've been following from at that time, and I really love your post around like you communicate. Like communication is a very key thing which you totally highlight on most majorly of the LinkedIn post. So my first question would be like, since in this stage AI is at a very boom now, but everyone is talking about AI, which is changing product management. But you have a very counterintuitive take. The most important skill PMs should have, it has not changed at all. So what do you actually mean by that?
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for having me on the podcast. And AI is everywhere right now, and I understand the hype, but yeah, in my opinion, the fundamentals of being a product manager haven't changed, and if anything, they've become more important. If we think about, what is product fundamentally, you have to understand a user's pain point, right, or desired gain. Then you solve that pain point or you deliver that gain. And if you do that, you create value.
Hmm.
And then you can capture a portion of that value as revenue. And so the bigger the pain you solve, or the bigger the gain you deliver, the more value you create and the more revenue you can capture from that value. And if you do that well enough, you have a thriving business.
Right.
So that equation of product, it hasn't changed, and it's the PM's job to balance it all on behalf of the company. And so if we think about, how a PM balances this equation, right? How do they identify the pains and the gains? How do they come up with a solution so they can create value? So if we look at identifying pains and gains, in my opinion, that's fundamentally human.
Hmm.
It requires empathy. It requires intuition. Often it requires a subjectivity that AI doesn't have, because people's deepest pains, their deepest fears, their deep desires, often aren't logical or predictable. AI can expand your thinking here, but I don't think it can replace human intuition.
Right.
AI can simulate empathy, but it can't viscerally feel the emotions being expressed, by your user. It can't recognize that same feeling, which is part of being empathetic. And so this core part of the PM job, which is deeply understanding user pains and goals, in my opinion, stays stubbornly human. And so, okay, now the PMs identified the pain. So how do they build a solution? This part also is fundamentally human, right? Getting a large group of people to align and build something big requires the human touch. It's the PM's job to translate between all the parties, engineering, design, business, users. It's the PM's job to align all these parties, right? By winning hearts and changing minds. It's the PM's job to layer in their judgment and solicit the right judgment from the right people. It's the PM's job to create focus when there are 100 things to chase. And so again, rallying this large group of people, in my opinion, requires that human touch. And I know, people will say, hey, doesn't AI allow us to accomplish the same work with fewer people? And it's true. But honestly, I think sometimes we fool ourselves, because we're not going to do the same thing we do today with fewer people. Let's be honest, we're going to attempt bigger things with the same people or even more people. It's just human nature. I love to think about COVID as this example. I remember when COVID first hit, people stopped commuting, and, they would get half hour back, an hour back. Some people got 2 or 3 hours back. But how many of us, myself included, poured that time into a work-life balance versus pouring that time back into work? And so, if we get these efficiency gains, I think our ambition just expands. It's not going to shrink
Right.
with AI. And so, if you think about it as a PM, now you're accomplishing bigger things with the same people, or maybe even more people at 10x the speed. And so those PM fundamentals like communication and alignment, in my opinion, will be more critical, not less.
So, like you said, the fundamentals are not going to change. But why is that reason everyone is feeling so unsettled right now? They are running behind learning AI and all those stuff. So, do you think
Yeah.
focusing on basics would be enough, or something else like should aspiring PMs or PMs should do?
Yeah. it is unsettling. I feel unsettled. I think everybody feels unsettled. So I think it's great that we're talking about this because I think it helps normalize things
Mhm.
for the folks out there who feel this. If I had to explain why I think people feel unsettled, I'm going to use a framing that I first heard from a fellow coach, Yui Zhao.
Mhm.
And it's this idea that human intelligence has three centers in the body. And so the first center is the head, right? So this is logic, analysis, pattern recognition. The head center of intelligence runs on facts and reason. Then there's the heart center. And so this is connection, creativity, curiosity. And this center of intelligence, the heart center, runs on emotion, not logic. And it's that intelligence that brings people together and connects people. And then the third center of intelligence is gut, right? We
Mhm.
often talk about our gut instinct.
Yeah.
And this is that judgment and discernment, that instinct for what's right, even when you can't fully explain why. And this center of intelligence shows up most often when the data runs out. You have that head smarts, heart smarts, and gut smarts. And so here's what I think is happening. For decades, being head smart was enough
Mhm.
for a product manager, right? So analytical rigor, pattern recognition, synthesizing information, that's what got you in the room. And when you were in school, you were rewarded for head smarts, right? Early in your career, especially when you're junior, you get rewarded for being an expert,
Mhm.
right? Who has the best analysis? Who has the best report? Who has the best data? And so being a head smart became the dominant way to demonstrate expertise and advance your career. The problem is that AI just became the smartest head in the room, right? For everybody. So it can synthesize more information faster than any
Mhm.
individual ever will be able to.
Yeah.
And so being head smart is quickly becoming table stakes, and not a differentiator. And so that I feel is genuinely if it's the skill that you built your entire career on. And
Mhm.
and in my opinion, this is why people feel unsettled. It's not because AI is taking over, but it's because this primary differentiator just evaporated. And I think you could get away with being head smart for so long, building deep expertise in an area, but I think it would mask a gap, right? Like a lot of people underinvested in heart smarts or
Mhm.
or the gut smarts. But as long as being head smart was scarce and hard, the gap didn't matter. And I think now that AI is commoditized being head smart, I think that gap is being fully exposed.
Mhm.
And so for me, that's why I talk a lot about investing in heart smarts, right? Especially to stand out in the age of AI.
Mhm.
It's about being able to read a room, connect with people, persuade, align. And yes, we can invest in getting better at AI, and we should, but you're still competing on head smarts, and everyone has basically been given the same advantage. So I think that unsettled feeling will go away when, PMs finally invest in those heart smarts and gut smart skills that were always important, but
Mhm.
that now in the age of AI, I think stand out as some of the most important.
Mhm. Yeah. So you basically mentioned one point about that in this age of AI, we have to connect with people, make connections with them, learn the art of persuasion. So I
Yeah.
have one question, like, I mean, I've also read your LinkedIn post. So always keep coming back to communication that most of
Yeah.
the PMs need to develop this thing. So why, like, you pay so much attention to that part and like above every other skill? I mean, why this communication is at the highest priority for you?
I shared some thoughts, but let me reiterate them and then let me
Mhm.
add a few more.
Sure.
So why do I think communication is the number one skill for product managers?
Mhm.
So the first thing is, I think it's just fundamental to what we do as PMs,
Yeah.
right? We have to translate between, how many of us have seen that diagram where there's like technology and business and users, and then there's that intersection in the middle. And so even in that traditional diagram, PMs have to translate between those three
Mhm.
parties. But if we're being honest, like as PMs, we talk to legal, finance, design, marketing, HR,
Everything. Yeah.
everybody. There's so
Yeah.
many different parties.
Right.
So that communication, that ability to align people, persuade, translate, it's just core to what we do. We don't lead by authority, we lead by influence.
Correct.
So that's the first thing. It's just fundamental to what we do in our job. The second one that I often talk about, because I help product managers grow their careers, is that it's how you scale, right? So if you imagine, your scope doubling or tripling or even quadrupling, right? You can't lead 100 people the same way you lead 10.
Mhm.
Right? If you're leading 10 people, you can meet with everybody one-on-one. But if you're leading 100 people, you can't do that. And so the higher up you go and the bigger your scope gets, like your ability to have impact comes down to the strength of your message, right? Can you rally large groups of people to action
Mhm.
just by the strength of your message? So that's the second one. The first one is fundamental to what we do, but I'd say the second is communication is how you have impact as your scope grows. And then, I'd say the last one is, I find it's how you build high performing teams, right? It's about being able to hear the stories that other people sometimes are struggling to tell, and being able to reframe it back to them in a way that brings clarity. Because, I know the number of times I've sat in a meeting with an executive. I remember at Google, I would often, be in a meeting and Hiroshi Lockheimer was there, who ran all of Android,
Mhm.
and he'd listen to what everybody was saying. There'd be lots of back and forth discussions, and then he'd pause and he'd basically not just summarize, but reframe what was being said in a way that brought clarity to everyone in the room.
Mhm.
And so that ability to help your teams tell better stories and clarify their own stories, is how you build those high performing teams.
Mhm.
So that's why I keep coming back to communication as, one of the fundamental skills of being a PM, but also it's how you grow your career.
Right. So in the middle of this conversation, you basically mentioned how you convey your message to a 10 people team as compared to the 100 people team. So
Yeah.
those are two very different things. And I also remember in one of your LinkedIn posts, you basically said that if like you at a Google, you basically handled like 200 plus people of the group for the product managers. So you
Yeah.
basically sent a message, and when it got to the baseline, it was totally different what you have shared. So that's how you said that the message has to be very strong. So then what is the exact way to communicate well? So how should be that approach?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's a great question, right? So then how do you improve your communication? I love the premise of that question because oftentimes I think we feel, oh, I either was born with the gift, to communicate, or I was born charismatic, or I'm not.
Yeah.
And like that's the number one thing. If I had to, leave the people listening to this podcast
Mhm.
with one thing, it's like you can learn
Mhm.
how to communicate well. It's a skill, right? Most of us aren't born natural communicators. I certainly wasn't, but it's a skill I built over time, and it totally made my career and my reputation.
Mhm.
And so it's really important that people, feel this is a learnable skill. And one of the reasons I left Google to do what I do is I remember so many times sitting in a room, seeing someone, in front of the audience presenting, their blood, sweat, and tears from months or years of effort. And meanwhile, like the audience is checked out or they're, on their laptops or on their phones.
Mhm.
And here's the thing, it's nobody's fault, right? Like nobody teaches you how to communicate well. It's not something that we're trained in. It's just something we all have to sort of pick up if we're lucky to do it. It's
Yes.
not the audience's fault, right? It's the speaker's job to earn their attention. But like you have to learn this skill. And so, one of the reasons I left is like this can be a skill that you can learn. And people deserve to get recognition for their hard work. And so,
Mhm.
anyways, that was a bit of a tangent, but
Mhm.
that's sort of why I love to teach this.
Mhm.
If I had to talk about how to communicate well, it's a lot that will be hard to cover all here. Let me say the three fundamentals of being a persuasive communicator. You have to, and I sum it up in a sentence. You
Mhm.
have to focus your audience on a compelling message that they can trust. And so the keywords are focus, compelling, and trust. And so if we talk about focus, the number one mistake I see PMs make is they try to say too much. And if you try to say too much, you end up saying nothing. An analogy I love to give, it's like pouring someone a great glass of wine, or in India, I know, great great black label whiskey, but then you dilute it with a ton of water. That wine, that whiskey is the good stuff you want to get across, and then you dump all this extra context that's not needed, and it dilutes your message. And so, the advice I would give to create focus is a tool I call Only One. If your entire pitch fell apart, right? Your audience is distracted. Maybe you had 30 minutes, you're down to 5 minutes, whatever it is. If everything fell apart and your audience could walk away with only one single takeaway,
Hmm.
what would you want that takeaway to be? And I find that this is a really helpful way to create laser focus in your message.
Hmm.
And that's the first part of being persuasive. The second part is being compelling, right? Someone who wants to listen to you beats someone who has to listen to you every single time. And people are persuaded. People decide with emotion first, and then they back it up with logic. If we think of Steve Jobs, right? He talks about benefits, not features, right?
Hmm.
Lead with the feeling of what it's like to have 1,000 songs in your pocket, and then talk about, how big the hard drive is,
Yeah.
or how fast the processor is. And so when it comes to, communication, we all will say, hey, yeah, you should know your audience, but like the truth is almost none of us do anything about that. And it's kind of a parallel to AI, right? If you don't put the right context in, you get generic answers out. And so that audience analysis, deeply understanding your audience, is the context that we need so that our pitch is not generic. And so what I tell people is like, don't overcomplicate it. Just think about your audience. What drives them? What keeps them up at 2 a.m. tossing and turning every night? What do they deeply desire and they talk about all the time?
Hmm.
So whatever it is, like just take a moment to think of your audience and connect what you're pitching to something that appeals to, a deep desire or helps alleviate, a deep fear. And then the last thing is trust. Trust is built over time. It's not instantaneous.
Yeah.
You could have two people approach you with the exact same pitch, but if one is someone who, you trust, they deliver on time, they do what they say they're going to do, and the other person has a history of maybe sometimes being late or not communicating fully, they could give you the exact same pitch, but you're
Hmm.
going to treat them very differently.
Yep. Yep.
So trust is important. And when you learn to communicate with real clarity, you make it focused, you make it compelling. What's interesting is people start to trust you. Every time you go into a room with them, they feel respected, right? They feel their time was honored because you took the time to really think about your communication. And that respect quietly builds trust in you over time, which extends your message. And
Got it.
so, anyways, that's how I would sum it up, right?
Hmm.
Focus your audience on a compelling message they can trust. So your audience has to understand your message, they have to care about it, and they have to believe your message. And there's a whole system behind it that I teach in my Maven course. But if you
Hmm.
just master that, one sentence and internalize it, like you're on your way to being a persuasive communicator.
Yep. Yep. So I will share Roshan's link of this Amplify PM to become a very persuasive leader as a product leader. So I will share that link in the description, so audience can check that out in the description. So I just have a follow-up question on this one. So like a few months back, you posted on LinkedIn that you have basically secured nine-digit budgets at Google, but that was like some years back. So in this age of AI, uh, the strategy that you just mentioned, will it be like, can it be applied at the same way that you did years before, or would it change because of this AI tech stack now?
Yeah, I think the fundamentals haven't changed.
Hmm.
So yeah, I often post about when I was at Google. We had this one initiative that had a $20 million budget, and we had decided that we needed to up that significantly and basically ask for almost $120 million as our budget. So yeah, it's Google, but that's still a pretty big leap.
Hmm.
um, and in that case, the way I did it was understanding that, again, when I understood the audience, what they cared about was growth.
Hmm.
And so when I walked into that budget conversation, I didn't pitch it as a cost. I pitched it as, how much growth do you want? And depending on how much growth you want, here's what it's going to cost.
Mhm.
And so just reframing things in a different way uh, let me secure that big increase, in a novel way. So if I think about AI, like I don't think the fundamentals of communication have changed, but I think AI can be an amazing communication coach in a way that maybe people haven't thought of before. So if we think about it, like AI is essentially a mirror for how you communicate. So if you give it vague prompts, you're going to get vague answers back,
Yep.
right? If you give it too little context, you get generic answers back. If you give it too much context, then you get muddled or confused answers back.
Right.
If you ask it to do five things at once, it might miss things or give you surface level results on all of them instead of an in-depth answer on one of them.
Mhm.
Even, framing, like we just talked about, how I frame that budget conversation, we're now trained when we often prompt AI to not just ask what we want, but to set up the frame, right?
Mhm.
Like you're the world's best, strategist when it comes to fintech. Based on that framing, here's now how I want you to view my ask.
Yeah.
And so AI is amazing. It mirrors what it mirrors our communication back to us, right? I mean, you can literally see the quality of your communication reflected back to you
Mhm.
in real time
Right.
because every time you prompt AI, you get instant results. I mean, if you think about it, like a bad email to your VP could take weeks or maybe even months to
Mhm.
produce consequences, but a bad prompt to AI, creates a bad output in seconds.
Yep.
And so you get immediate feedback. And if the way you're communicating your thinking is clear, focused, and well framed. And so you can iterate in minutes, what used to take quarters. And this is, a self-reinforcing loop. So while the fundamentals of communication haven't changed, now with AI, every iteration with AI is basically a rep at being a better communicator. And so you communicate your intent, you get mediocre output, you go back and you tweak, right? You sharpen the ask, you add more context, you cut the noise,
Mhm.
and then you try again and you get better results. And when you get better results, now you know what better communication looks like. And then it repeats. You get better at prompting AI, you get better at communicating, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, hopefully that answers your question. I think the fundamentals of how you persuade haven't changed, and it's important that you understand how that works. But the tools you have to improve your communication is much better right now.
Yep. Yep. So I'll just conclude for my audience that AI is not just a productivity tool. Like Roshan sees it a little differently, which is like AI can be used as a communicator tool, and it can help you frame your answers or questions you want to ask in a much better way. So just a follow up on that also, like
Yeah.
so you're saying like better communication makes us better at AI and AI makes us better communicators. So for any PM who wants to grow into the leadership roles, how do you suggest like what advice you have for them so that they can take advantage of this feedback loop basically using AI technology,
How can you get better at communication and leverage AI to do it?
right?
The first thing I think is just remembering to invest in these PM fundamental skills. It's really tempting to only focus on learning AI. It's important to do that, but like we talked about, you're competing on head smarts. And the things that now stand out are those hard smarts, how you connect people, how you rally all these large groups of people to action. And so the number one thing is if you haven't been investing in this area before, you should do it. So how do you invest in this area? The first is use AI as a mirror, right? And so every time you prompt it and you don't get the results that you do, pause for a moment and look at how you prompted,
Hmm.
right? We probably are all doing this naturally and maybe try 10 different framings, right? In an hour just to see what lands.
Yeah.
Even if you get the right answer out, like practice saying it 10 different ways. And again, you can get instant feedback. So that kind of rep-based practice didn't exist before. So that's one way you can use AI to get better at communication. Other ways to get started, that only one tool that I mentioned, if your entire pitch fell apart and your audience could leave with only one thing, just pick that and start using that tool anytime you're doing a pitch going forward,
Mhm.
right? Anytime you want to communicate, even in an email, if you want to communicate in an email, if only one thing could come across in this email, what would I want that one thing to be? So I think practicing that, only one tool to focus what you're saying is a great way to get started. You could take a course on communication and storytelling.
Mhm.
To me, the ROI of that is double, right? Because it's a fundamental skill of being a PM. It's how you scale your leadership.
Yep.
But also, like we talked about, the people who do well with AI are the ones who can communicate their intent with the most clarity, with the most focus asked, with just the right amount of context.
Mhm.
And so investing in those communication courses, I have one, but there are others out there. The key is just take the time to invest in it, and that can make a big difference.
Got it.
So those would be my suggestions for getting started. I think a
Amazing.
lot of it is just pushing people
Mhm.
to prioritize this and even take that first step.
Amazing. So that should be it for our audience. So I really hope that everyone enjoyed this session and all the takeaways that Roshan has shared. Definitely apply those in your job. And if you want to reach out to him for learning about how to become a very better or maybe the best communicator in your organization, then feel free to reach out to Roshan and definitely he can help you in that part. So thank you so much, Roshan, for your time, and we'll connect again soon.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I love the conversation.